and it's presented broadly in two parts. The first covers the history of Treasure Trove, some of the legal principles which underpin the current system, and it also talks about the team today, including what to do if you find something, how to report it, and how that process works. The second part discusses some recent finds from Melrose and the wider Scottish borders. It will take the form of, I'm afraid, a bit of a whirlwind, but broadly chronological tour of finds from the area, from later prehistory right through to the post-medieval period. And I'll get a disclaimer in early. While I will be discussing one or two finds from Roman Scotland, including this really wonderful miniature bull figurine on the screen in front of you, it's not my area of specialism. And I'd like to thank Dr. Fraser Hunter for his time and expertise, but of course any mistakes remain my own. And finally, before we get going, any images you see in the presentation tonight are Crown copyright unless otherwise stated. You'll see at the bottom of the screen there are four logos: Scottish Government, the QLTR, National Museum of Scotland and Treasure Trove, and I'll explain very shortly how they all tie in together. So what is Treasure Trove? Well, it's essentially the legal framework for managing portable antiquities that are found in Scotland. And importantly, it's entirely distinct from frameworks elsewhere in the UK. It rests on the common law principle of bona vacantia. It's Latin, and it broadly translates, although not exactly, as ownerless goods. And this means that portable antiquities such as a Bronze Age spear, an 18th century toy, or a 19th century ingot form a subset of this wider principle of ownerless goods. So portable antiquities fall within this broader principle. Although the legalities behind what can and cannot be considered treasure trove can sometimes be complex, essentially for the purposes of tonight, any humanly made or modified object, regardless of age, material or object type, may be claimed by the Crown and allocated to an accredited museum in Scotland. This right to portable antiquities is exercised by the Crown's representative in Scotland, which is the Queen's and Lord's Treasurer's Remembrancer. It's a bit of a mouthful, so QLTR for short. And this position is currently held by David Harvey, the Crown agent. Now, it's at this stage that I must make it clear for anyone who might be familiar with the system in England, Wales and Northern Ireland and the Portable Antiquities Scheme. The 1996 Treasure Act does not apply to Scotland. Here, finders of all archaeological material, not just objects of precious metal or hoards, have a legal responsibility to declare it. And we've got two images on the screen here. On the right is a nice toffee-coloured flint arrowhead. It's a barbed and tanged form, late Neolithic, early Bronze Age. And on the left is a rather nice, although a bit green, annular brooch, probably late medieval to early post-medieval in date. The two terminals of the frame overlap to restrict the pin at the top there, and the bottom of the pin rests on the other side of the frame, and the frame itself has got some really nice incised lineal decoration. This right of ownership is quite an old one. This is an example. It's a case from the calendar of documents relating to Scotland during the reign of Edward I in England. So it covers quite a period, published in 1884. And this particular case dates to 1278. The reference to treasure trove, so the concerning treasure trove bit, is probably a 19th century context, understanding of treasure trove rather than a 13th century understanding of treasure trove. But an individual by the name of Adam found 21 silver pennies of old money. We don't know what kind of money, old money within the King of Scotland's liberty, which were lately delivered to the justices for their lord the king, whereon the steward of Scotland claimed the treasure for his lord's use. This particular case seems to be linked to land ownership and the Crown owning land, rather than a claim to unowned material, the coins themselves. But over the centuries, the Crown's right to ownerless goods was expanded, and by the mid-18th century, this broadened to include any movable property, for example, a portable antiquity, which had once been owned but was now unowned. And this means today that anything from a Mesolithic flint to a 19th century token should be reported to the Treasure Trove Unit for assessment. And here is the team today. The Treasure Trove Unit, TTU for short, has delegated responsibility from the QLTR, the Crown Office, to run the Treasure Trove process. We're funded by the Scottish Government and we're an incredibly small team. It currently comprises 3 people. The Treasure Trove Manager, that's Emily on the left there, just kneeling down, and 2 Treasure Trove officers, Sophie on the right, our newest member, and myself in the middle. All three of us have our own research interests. Emily works predominantly on Roman coins, the types of denominations that are found in Scotland and the distribution patterns. Sophie on the right works, well, she predominantly has an interest in prehistoric lithics. And I have quite a range of interests, but the main two that I'm working on at the moment are late medieval seal matrices, so the seals, the die stamps that you use to make an impression in a wax seal on a document, and also Bronze Age metalwork. But between the three of us, we have quite a wide responsibility to assess every artefact that comes out of the ground, inland water and some coastal waterways in Scotland, where they're found by metal detecting, by farming, dog walking, magnet fishing, field walking, gardening. You can add in your own hobby or profession there. So what kind of material do we deal with? There are some stipulations. So essentially it has to be any object which has once been owned, but whose original owner cannot now be known or found, so it's now ownerless. It has to be artifactual. So it's an object which has been made or modified by human intervention. This means that if a whale bone were to wash up on the shore, we wouldn't be able to claim it as treasure trove. But if a piece of scrimshaw, so whale bone that's been carved or engraved with whaling scenes, washed up, we would be able to claim that as treasure trove. And finally, and importantly, it has to be found in Scotland. We have no jurisdiction or claim to finds found out with Scotland. And there are some exceptions as well. We do not deal with human remains. If you come across human remains, please call the police. No unworked animal remains, back to that whale bone. Geological material, again, we don't deal with, so things like bits of meteorites or nuggets of gold or precious metals or things like that. And we don't deal with wreck, so flotsam jetsam, that falls under the remit of the receiver of wreck, not the QLTR. And what do we see? Well, anything and everything. And what do we want to see? And I say this with some trepidation, well, anything and everything. We're happy to advise on whether we need to assess something, but I'll talk you through a bit of a tour of finds and a bit of the breadth of the finds that we see fairly regularly. The first in the top left is an Iron Age button and loop fastener. It's copper alloy and it's really identifiable. To the right of that is a small silver annular buckle, probably late medieval in date. To the right of that is a silver heart-shaped brooch, again late medieval in date, and it's got a lovely inscription around the heart-shaped frame. Top right is a lead alloy toy horse. Bottom left, a small group of buckles, single and double looped buckles, late medieval to early post-medieval in date. And to the top right of the buckles is a small star-shaped object with a hole in the middle. That's the rowel from a spur, from an equestrian spur. And to the right of the rowel is a ring. It's silver. It's 14th century, there or thereabouts. Quite large, possibly for going over a glove. And it has a series of panels around the outside, and each of those panels you'll just about see, depending on how big your screen is, has a letter. And the letters all make up a religious invocation, and it's usually the name of Christ. It's usually Jesus or Jesus Nazarenus, so Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, or some various contraction of that. Below the ring is another medieval find. It is a harness pendant, or at least part of it. It's part of a two-piece harness pendant, which would have swung from a horse harness 13th or 14th century. You'll see just where the soil is compacted in at the top there, there's a little pin or a rivet from which a smaller internal pendant would have hung and swung and rattled and shone as the horse moved. And on the right, bottom right, the big green thing is a really lovely early Bronze Age flat axe head. And it continues. Top left, we have a group of lead projectiles. There are a group of musket balls, pistol balls, and a powder cap to the right. In the centre is one of the object types that I particularly like to work on. It's a medieval seal matrix. It has a legend, the lettering around the edge, which reads Sigillum Secreti, which is secret seal, and a visual motif in the centre of a lion rampant. It's probably 14th century. To the right of that is a flint, a really nicely worked flint, barbed and tanged arrowhead again. Bottom left is a small hoard of Roman coins, and to the bottom right is a small hoard of complete and cut half pennies of Henry III of England. So what should you do if you find something? And it could be by any manner of discovery. So people who are gardening, people who are detecting, people who are magnet fishing, all sorts. Well, should you find an object in the first instance, please contact us. In an email with some images for scale are fantastic. And we're happy to then advise if it's something that we need to either see in person or record, or we can maybe do that remotely. But if so, we'll ask you to fill out a reporting form. And that's the document just on the left here. This includes finder's details, find spot information, and everything we need to comprehensively record an object. Once an object has then been recorded, we decide whether it's archaeologically significant and whether it would benefit from being in a museum collection in Scotland. If we decide that is the case, we then claim the item on behalf of the Crown, and the finder of the object receives a full report for that object and a date of a panel meeting to which the object will go. That panel is called the Scottish Archaeological Finds Allocation Panel, another mouthful, SAFAP for short. And SAFAP is a panel of experts who advise the QLTR on the valuation of a find and to which museum the find should go. It comprises professional and lay members, and the current chair of SAFAP is Jane Ryder, who was appointed just last month by Scottish ministers. Finders of chance finds, so finds of medieval coins or rings or Bronze Age axe heads, for example, are usually eligible for an ex gratia award. This is estimated at the current market value of the find, and it's paid for by the museum, which eventually acquires the find as well. If a find does not need to be claimed, which is the majority of the objects that are reported to us, we record the objects and we return it to the finder along with a disclaim certificate. We find that the vast majority of people that report finds to us are metal detectorists. And we've certainly seen an increase in individuals taking up metal detecting during the pandemic. You can understand why. It's an outdoor activity. It's largely solo as well. And so we've seen those numbers really rise quite considerably. If that's you or someone you know, or something you're thinking of taking up, then there are a few key things to be aware of. The first is to make sure you have landowner permission before you detect on someone's land. This could be anyone. It could be the Crown, it could be a local council, it could be a government body, or it could be a private individual. It's important to ask the landowner rather than a tenant, for example. Secondly, it is illegal to detect on scheduled monuments. These are protected sites of national importance, and there are over 8,000 of them in Scotland. You cannot detect on a monument without Section 42 consent, so the landowner cannot give you permission. And scheduled monuments are cared for by Historic Environment Scotland, and they've got loads of excellent resources about this, including PassMap, which is an excellent online map resource you can use to check where scheduled monuments are and avoid them, leaving their archaeological integrity intact. Third, if you find any object, it may well be caked in mud and clay and soil and lots of bits and pieces. Any excess dirt you should remove carefully, but please do not clean your finds. This can remove the protective surface patina of the object, as well as any important decorative details, especially those that perhaps you can't see with the naked eye. For example, flecks of gilding and things like that. Claimed objects that have been damaged by cleaning may receive a lower ex gratia award as a result of that. So it's something to be really careful and aware of. And finally, and this is just as important, please take an accurate find spot when you remove finds from the ground. We recommend that finders take an initial reading in the field using a handheld GPS device or their phone, for example, and then they double check the accuracy of that when they get home. So a website such as the one on the right, which is Grid Reference Finder, is quite useful. You can just zoom in and click on the spot. And again, PassMap does the same thing. Ideally, we prefer a 10-figure national grid reference. That's just what our database uses and is happiest with. But really, we can accept and use any of latitude, longitude. What 3 words is quite popular at the moment. Eastings, northings, or degrees, minutes, seconds. So as long as you're taking an accurate find spot, we'll be able to convert that regardless. I've got quite a nice quote. There aren't too many quotes in this talk, don't worry. An accurate find spot is really important. It's the only record of where an object has come up from after it's been removed from the ground. And this helps us build up the picture of what's coming up from an area and how finds are being distributed across any given landscape, whether that's the corner of a field or a large settlement complex. This is important regardless of whether we receive 100 objects from a field from the same finder who knows the area really, really well, or 100 finds from 20 different people who are reporting in a more piecemeal manner over several years, or indeed, and we do have it, several decades. So this chance finds create this patchwork picture of Scotland's archaeology, and it's aptly summed up here by Sir James Young Simpson in his anniversary address to the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland in 1861. Chance finds, like stray words or letters that have dropped out of the book of time, they themselves individually reveal nothing, but when placed alongside of other words and letters from the same book, they gradually form into lines and sentences. And that's certainly the picture that Treasure Trove finds build up over the years. If you should find something in situ, and by in situ I mean in an archaeological context, a good example of that would be a coin hoard still in its pot. Please resist the temptation to dig it up. Instead, the finder should cover the find spot over and contact us or the local authority archaeologist immediately. Finds in an archaeological context can tell us so much more when formally excavated. And indeed, the Treasure Trove Unit can respond to and excavate in situ finds. And a wonderful example of this can be seen with the ongoing case from the Scottish borders of the Peebles Hoard. This is it here. There's a few objects on the left, and the hoard pit is the image on the right. And in June 2020, a metal detectorist discovered an in situ hoard of Bronze Age horse harness gear. The objects on the left are some of the first objects they pulled out of the ground. They then realised very quickly they'd stumbled upon something quite significant, so stopped. But the objects on the left are the copper alloy harness fittings, strap fittings, and the like. Thanks to their quick actions, a team of archaeologists from National Museum Scotland and conservators from National Museum Scotland, along with the Treasure Trove Unit and importantly the finder as well, were on site within days to carefully excavate what would turn out to be a really, really quite important discovery. The hoard itself is late Bronze Age in date, and we're looking at about 1000 to 900 BCE. Among the finds was a sword still in its scabbard, decorated straps, buckles, rings, ornaments, even wheel axle caps from a vehicle, so a wagon or a cart or something similar. There is also evidence of a decorative rattle pendant that would have hung off the harness. It would have shone and made noise. It's the first one from Scotland and only the second in the UK. And most impressively, the soil had preserved organic materials like leather and wood. So some of those straps that link all of these metal fittings and components still survive, which means that we can now trace the way that rings and buckles and fittings were all connected together to make up the complete harness. While we've had late Bronze Age horse harnesses from Britain before and from Scotland, we've never had the opportunity to excavate it to modern standards. And so thanks to the way this harness has been preserved by the soil, we're able to, for the first time ever, to see how Bronze Age horse harnesses, or at least this example, were assembled. The image is just here. The bottom left, you can just see the sword that's placed across the top of the hoard. So there's a horse harness beneath, the sword laying across the top. And on the top left, you've got part of the rattle pendant that's just about visible. Owing to the intricate nature of the hoard, generally treasure trove excavations, when we go and excavate in the field, we tend to spend about 1 to 3 or 4 days. This one took over 3 weeks. It was so intricate because we've got all of these interconnected straps and textiles and surviving organic materials that it took 22 days investigating the site. The decision was then made that the hoard was far too complex to excavate in the field, and as such was removed from the site in a large block of soil. That's the soil packed into a crate just here. It was then removed to National Museum Scotland's Collection Centre in Edinburgh, where careful excavation research is ongoing at the moment. By lifting the hoard and the surrounding soil in a block, we can now work further to excavate the hoard in lab conditions and make sure the artifacts are carefully preserved. And as ever, whenever I talk about these finds, I must always really extend thanks to the finder for their actions and their support through the dig, and to the expertise and support provided by National Museum Scotland colleagues as well. So work is ongoing, and watch this space. For those of you who are interested or don't know much about this find, there is a wonderful 3D model which has been produced on Sketchfab by Dr. Hugo Anderson Weinmark for Treasure Trove. You can rotate the model completely, and you can click on certain parts of the hoard pit for further information as well. So do have a look if you've not already. And during the pandemic, we responded not only to the Peebles hoard, but other in situ finds. These included a coin hoard from Dumfries and Galloway, a Bronze Age hoard in Aberdeenshire, another Bronze Age hoard in Midlothian. They're a bit like buses, they come along 2 at a time, and an intact medieval vessel in the Scottish borders as well. All of those have benefited from formal excavation, and they're currently in progress under the Treasure Trove system. But so far during this talk, I've spoken exclusively about chance finds. So these are finds made by members of the public through various activities. But the Crown has right to all ownerless property, ownerless finds in Scotland. And we also deal not just with finds made by members of the public, but also finds that are coming up through formal excavation. So commercial archaeology excavation units that are doing professional work day in, day out. Those also get declared as Treasure Trove. They also get allocated through SAFAP. There's a slight difference in that they don't receive an ex gratia award, and we don't see the finds in the office. They are dealt with by the excavation units, they're written up, the reports are submitted, then they get allocated remotely. So I'm not going to talk too much about excavation assemblages in that sense. This talk is primarily about public finds. But there will be time for questions after if that's something that interests you. I'd like to now spend just a couple of minutes talking about Treasure Trove during the pandemic, and I'll keep it as positive as I can. Operationally, the last 2 years have been very difficult. Treasure Trove staff have been unable to access the office where the finds are stored for much of the various lockdown periods. But good news, we're currently in the office 4 to 5 days a week each. And we're really busy trying to process a huge backlog of finds, both physically in the office and administratively as well via email. So if you're emailing us for general updates, we will get back to you eventually. It's just that we're trying to process and prioritise artefacts as quickly as we possibly can at the moment. And while the pandemic has curtailed many of our large-scale outreach events, such as Finds Days, which we used to hold all over Scotland, we are beginning to visit local museums now who have taken in finds on our behalf in recent months or over the last year. A recent example of this was a really successful visit to Elgin Museum up in Murray in November last year, where we picked up new finds for assessment and deposited disclaimed finds for collections by local finders. I'm really pleased to say we're currently in discussions with Trimontium Museum about a similar partnership. So if you're a local finder, please keep your eyes peeled for more information. We also have welcomed a new staff member in the form of Treasure Trove Officer Sophie Flynn. She previously worked in England for the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and she has a vast amount of finds experience and knowledge. She's a really wonderful addition to the team, expanding the unit from 2 to 3 people for the first time. Additionally, during the pandemic, the unit has been working hard at improving our recording process. So we've got a new case management system and a new website. And the website is in the lower image on the screen. It should be your first port of call for all things Treasure Trove related. You can find the code of practice on here. You can find information about what to do if you find something, and you can also download our reporting form. As COVID restrictions continue to ease, it's also where you'll be able to find information, as well as on our social media channels, about our outreach plans and upcoming SAFAP meetings as well. The case management system is the upper image on the screen. It's another word for our database. This is where all of our object records go, and you can see a summary view of the page on the screen there. This new system automates some of the work that has previously been manual. So when it goes fully live, finders will receive automatic emails when the status of their material changes. So if we hit the disclaim button on the coin, the finder gets an automatic email update about that with instructions about what to do next. And a really important part of this is a forthcoming public database. And this means for the first time that the members of the public will be able to search our database for the finds that we've recorded, and that finders for the first time will be able to log in and keep track of their finds. We don't have a time frame for it yet. We're a long way through the development, but we'll publicise on our social media and our website once that goes live. So again, I'm saying it a lot, but watch this space. And now I've been chatting for about half an hour, so I'm going to move on quickly to the second part of the talk, which is recent finds from the Scottish borders, a few from Melrose and a few from slightly further afield. It's a real whirlwind tour from the Middle Bronze Age right through to the 18th century. And it's a mix of items. Some of them have been claimed and allocated to a museum. Some of them have been recorded and are due to be claimed, but are waiting for a meeting post-pandemic. And there's another one in there that's still awaiting a decision as well. So we're going to start in later prehistory, Middle Bronze Age. And this is a Bronze Age axe head. It was found by metals detecting in the borders. It dates to about 1400 to 1100 BCE. And it's a type of axe head which is typical of the Middle Bronze Age, called a flanged axe head. This is a later short flanged axe head. And you can see more clearly on the bottom image on the right. The right-hand side of the object is the cutting edge, the blade edge, and the left-hand object is the butt, so where the handle gets attached. And from the butt, expanding up to about halfway down the body of the axe head, you can see these rhomboidal flanges that rise up either side of the body. And if you look at the top image, you can just about see that these are hammered over. This is where the haft or the handle is fitted onto the axe head and the flange is hammered over to better affix that. It's a type that's fairly well known. It is well distributed from eastern North Yorkshire right through to southwest Scotland, up into northwest Scotland. So we're looking, southwest Scotland to northeast Scotland. So we're looking at Fife, Angus, Aberdeenshire. It's the first of its type from the Scottish borders. That's not particularly surprising. It fits well within that northerly distribution. It will be claimed and it's awaiting allocation once we get the SAFAT meetings going again. To put it in its evolution of Bronze Age axes, very quickly and very crudely for you, the top left is an axe head from Angus. It was claimed a couple of years ago, and it is one of the earliest metal axes from Scotland. It isn't bronze. It's actually a copper, arsenical copper alloy, so copper and arsenic. And it's a very, very early form of metal axe. Top right, we're still in the early Bronze Age at this point. But instead of being completely flat, the edges and the sides of the body, and you may not be able to see it from this angle, sorry, but they're very, very slightly thickened and developed. And then by the Middle Bronze Age, bottom left, that develops to full flanges. And then bottom right, by the Late Bronze Age, they develop socketed, so it's two-piece casting, two-piece molds, and they can develop socketed tools and socketed weapons, and including axe heads. So you've got a round socket on this example here, where the handle fits in, and a side loop which can be tied onto the handle to better secure it in place. Staying in the Late Bronze Age, this is the only bit of gold I'm going to show you. It's found by metal detecting near Churnside, and it dates to about 1000 to 800 BCE. It's a type of Penannular ring from the Late Bronze Age, and we have lots of them in the Late Bronze Age of various forms, but this one is conventionally known as a lock ring. There are 10 known from Scotland, and this is the first one that has been found in Scotland for over 70 years. It's gold. It is made from 3 sheets of gold, essentially, 2 face plates that join on the outside edge, and then a sheet in the centre which just forms that inner circular edge. There's some post-depositional damage, so it's come apart at the seams a little bit. Some gold wire has been soldered around the edge. That's also come away slightly, and the entire thing is hollow inside. It's claimed as treasure trove, and it was allocated to National Museum Scotland in December 2019. We are going to leave the Bronze Age, finally, but we're going to stick with axes. So we're into the earliest Iron Age now. And I've got a question mark, I'll explain that, why that is in a second. This is an axe head. It's not as large as the first axe head we saw, and in fact you don't get a sense of just how tiny it is until you see someone's massive hand holding it in the bottom image. It is a very, very small version of a socketed axe head, so that late Bronze Age style of axe head. It has a socket, so it plausibly could have had a handle. It's got a nice side loop as well, and the body expands to a cutting edge which is ever so slightly asymmetrical. We see this on larger axes all the time, and it's a symbol of wear. They're primarily woodworking tools, and we see these uneven cutting edges quite a lot. And one of the questions this example raised was, well, was it functional? What's this for? Is it something that is a small axe or a small woodworking tool? Or is it something that is more symbolic, something that is amuletic or worn as a pendant, for example? Small socketed axes occur from the late Bronze Age, from the very late Bronze Age, right through to the Roman period. They vary enormously in morphology, in size, in style, in decorative form. They're really quite a disparate bunch. But this one provoked a few research questions, and I started a small research paper which is ongoing between myself and a colleague, Dr. Matthew Knight at National Museum of Scotland. And we're looking at small socketed axes from northern Britain, so that's socketed axes from Scotland and the border counties of Northumberland and Cumbria. And we're asking some of these questions about function, use, how they're being made, wear analysis, what kind of metal composition is being used. And it's a small group of 11 axes, and the Moorbattle example has really prompted all of those questions. It was claimed as treasure trove, and it was allocated to Live Borders in December 2019. And here's just a group shot of some of the, it's 11 in total, but 6 here of the small socketed axes we're currently working on. The Moorbattle example is in the bottom right. And of the 3 just in the row above, the one on the right there as well is also from the Borders, is from Maxton. And it's just as small, if not a little bit smaller than the Moorbattle example as well. Leaving the early Iron Age, we're going to move thoroughly into the Roman period. And as Rob said, some people in the audience will certainly recognise this one. I've been given express permission to name the find on this occasion, and it's one of Trimontium's young volunteers, Harlan, found by metal detecting near Melrose, and it is a small bull figurine. It's beautiful. It's in a pose of a bull walking with the right leg raised and the head turned to the left. The musculature on the left-hand side is really nicely developed, I think, to demonstrate that the bull is actually turning and in motion. The bull horns are incredibly worn, so you can't see them in too much detail. And some of the face detail are a little bit crude as well, but the actual object is cast really, really nicely, and the casting seams have been filed away with care, and you can see under a microscope those file marks on the back and the belly of the beast. It had a tail originally, and this would have attached in 2 places on the rump of the animal, and it would have attached all the way around into a complete loop. This may be for suspension. It seems to have been a weak point on the object because it's broken. This may have been a casual loss as the object broke. We do have some really nice parallels in Dutch and French collections. And the finder and his father have also sent some of their own research across with other parallels. All of this pose of the bull walking with the leg raised either to the right or to the left. And all the examples that I've seen in the Dutch and the French collections, the tail is also broken. This will be claimed and it's awaiting allocation. And when an object is claimed, every accredited museum within the council area is eligible to apply for it. Staying in the Roman period, and I can't avoid talking about this one because of where it's allocated. This is a Roman coin, it's a denarius, the most common denomination of Roman coin that we find in Britain, found by metal detecting, not hugely too far away from Hawick. It's a denarius of the Emperor Hadrian, minted in Rome in 117 CE. The obverse names Hadrian and all of his titles, and it also has him, the bust of him to the right, with a laureate wreath, and he's draped in cuirass, so he's got armour under his drapery. On the reverse, we have the goddess Concordia. She's seated, she's holding a dish in one hand and some cornucopiae under her throat, under her seat as well. She's named at the bottom. We've got Concord at the bottom there. This was claimed as treasure trove and it was allocated to Trimontium Museum in October 2020. And this is one that we are really hoping we can transfer over in the near future so they can accession it into their collection. We're going to skip forward about 700 years and we're well into the early medieval period now. So we're into post-Roman Scotland and we're into the Viking Age. This is a lead weight. It was found by metal detecting again near Coldingham. And it's a Viking Age weight with insular metal work set into the top of it. So this open copper alloy grill that's slightly convex, you can see on the bottom right-hand image, is laid into that lead alloy. Weights with insular metal work like this are typical of the early Viking Age. So we're looking around the 9th century, more or less. It's the first of its type from the Scottish borders in 20 years. It will likely be claimed. This is one object from a finder who has a very, very large assemblage of finds. So we're still working through those and it's awaiting allocation. And now we're fully into the late medieval period and one of my favourite object types. This was found also, unsurprisingly, by metal detecting near Roxburgh. It's 13th or 14th century. It's a seal matrix and it's used to make an impression into a wax seal, so to seal and or authenticate a document in the late medieval period. The shape is called a vesica shape. This seems to be particularly used by clergy and women. And the legend, the writing around the outside names an individual. It's in Latin, it's S', which is a contracted version of sigillum, so seal. And then it names the individual Agnetus de Fenton, Agnes of Fenton. This is really interesting because it's one of only 3 seal matrices that the TTU has ever recorded that positively identifies a woman. Usually they're either male or we just can't identify them. And the motif in the centre is a fairly standard Christian motif. It's a pelican in her piety. The bird at the top is sitting over a nest with 3 chicks just below, and the bird is plucking her breast to draw blood to feed her chicks, and it's widely regarded as the symbol of Christ's sacrifice. This seal matrix was claimed and allocated to Liv Borders in December 2019. Seal matrices are they have huge research potential, especially the Scottish material, because unlike elsewhere in Britain, they almost always name an individual. And quite often that individual hasn't survived in the written records. So seal matrices are a really fantastic way of bringing up names and individuals from late medieval Scotland into the here and now. And finally, into the post-medieval period, and we're looking 17th, 18th century at this stage. This is a small communion token. Communion tokens used by the Reformed churches in the post-medieval period for admission to closed communion. It was found near Melrose. Date-wise, it's early 17th century through to the 18th century, and it's a token of Melrose Parish Church. It's uniface, so it's decorated on just one face, one side, and it's got 4 motifs. The first in the upper left is a mason's hammer, which is known as a mel, and I'm sure for those of you who are local, you know where this is going. Lower right is a rose, and the combination of the mel and the rose is quite clear. There's a small crescent in the upper right, and there's a small star in the lower left, and the reverse is undecorated. This is one that's still under assessment, so it's been recorded. We now need to make a decision about whether it's going to be claimed or disclaimed. This will depend on significance, similar examples in other collections, and things like that. So that's a bit of a whirlwind tour through the Scottish borders and the Melrose area from prehistory to the post-medieval 18th century. I hope tonight I've given you a bit of a sense of an overview of treasure trove in Scotland, what you might need to do should you find something archaeological in Scotland, who to contact, and also a sense of the kind of material we see, the breadth of finds that we assess, and the kind of things we claim and allocate to museums as well. I think I'm about at my 40 minutes, so I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's talk, and I'm around for as long as you need for any questions as well. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Ella, so much. That was fantastic. If people, the one downside of Zoom is we can't hear people. So if people want to unmute themselves quickly and give Ella a wee round of applause, I think that's only fair. She's tonight. So thank you, Ella.
Thank you, Anna. Very good.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Lovely. If I ask you just to mute your microphones quickly again, that'd be fantastic. So thanks, loads of information there. I mean, some lovely objects, of course, but what's exciting for us at Trimontium is the kind of discussion on the partnership with us and that going forward. I like the idea of the case management system that you discussed with us. So obviously, when you publicise more of that, I will push that out across our audiences as well. And really nice that you're able to include Harlan's find, of course, which is a fantastic find, and really interesting that the work you're doing on that and where it's going. So well done, Harlan. Good effort. I suppose I've got a question to start off, and if anyone's got any questions, if you pop them in the chat for Ella, I can give you a shout. So if you do that, that'd be really useful. But I suppose I've got a question which I'm intrigued about, because I was wondering, when you get some of the finds which are urgently in need of getting out the ground, as you mentioned earlier on with the Peebles one, can you just give the brief kind of outline of how you all swing into action? Obviously you've got other jobs, you've got other commitments to get on with and stuff, and obviously sometimes these are kind of time sensitive. I just wonder if you give us a little brief outline of how you go about that.
Yeah, you're quite right, we do swing into action. We usually have support from National Museum Scotland as part of the reason why we're based at the museum physically, although we work for the Crown Office and we're funded by the Scottish Government. We do have a working relationship with National Museum Scotland. So if we get a phone call, we decide how urgent it is. If we need to go out that day, we'll try our best. Usually it takes a day or two just to get permissions in place, especially during COVID, because we've had social distancing guidelines, we've had car sharing issues, all of those things we take for granted. We've had to kind of go through the paperwork with. So with Peebles, we were out in a matter of days, and we knew that was a significant find. Other finds, if it's just half a day here or there, we can do that fairly quickly as well. But now we're in a place where we know how the restrictions work, and we know what we need to do to get around that and excavate safely as well. But it really is all hands to deck. We down everything and we head out to site. We've had quite a big mix of finds. It tends to be quite a lot of Bronze Age hoards at the moment. They're very popular for some reason. We also deal with several coin hoards, which provide different challenges. I think the most challenging one we had, other than Peebles, was a coin hoard that was found in a pot, but a tree root system had grown through the pot and dragged the hoard out. So my first ever excavation was spent face down in a tree root system, which was totally atypical of most of the excavations we do. So it's really getting to sites as quickly as we can, as safely as possible, and trying to assess how best to remove the finds. And every excavation is a completely different set of circumstances, of course.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. And on the Peebles find, you mentioned the organic material, allowing you to identify the actual fitting and placement of the leather straps and the metal fittings. Has that work been published at all yet, or is that still under kind of?
No, it's ongoing. So the hoard is still in the block of soil. It's undergoing excavation at the moment. So it's going to be painstaking, because those leather textiles, the organics, but probably some leather straps, are all intertwined with each other. So it's not a simple case of excavating layer by layer. It's a big bundle that needs to be excavated in a big tangle. So it's ongoing at the moment.
It reminds me of the White Horse Hill find from Dartmoor, which was about 5 or 6 years ago, and that was some organic woven ware amongst the finds, and it looked like nothing when it came out the ground, and it took a forever to unpick. But it was well worth the wait.
I think you've even got the ponytail.
Thank you. Heidi messaged while you were talking. I didn't want to interrupt you, and I wondered if it's possible, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but you had some slides earlier on, which she was quite interested as to if you were able to identify where some of them were found. That might not be possible because the mixture of objects may have been not selected for location, but that was some of your earlier slides. Would you be able to help with that, or is that a bit too far?
Was that the 2 slides, Heidi, where I had just a complete range of finds?
You there, Heidi?
Yes, that's, yeah. Only if it's no trouble. I was just interested to. I was just interested to see if any of them were from around here. But we've had so much information since that point. I'm actually blown away by the number of objects that have been found on our own doorstep.
No, so those finds are a complete mix from all over Scotland. If there's any in particular you're interested in, I can have a look. If you drop me an email, I'll have a look. But off the top of my head, I can't tell you, I'm afraid. It's a complete mix.
That's fine.
Yeah, no worries. That's lovely. Thanks anyway, Heidi, for asking. And I guess Heidi, sorry, Ella, if you're okay, your email address is available at Treasure Trove for members of the public, and they've got any specific questions, they can message you, I presume.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no worries. Well, look, thanks for tonight. It was intriguing and fascinating. I say my only one downside with the Zoom is we can't hear our audience, and we know we had 75 people at one point tonight, so it was a crowded hall. I think maybe before we call it a night and go and have a cup of tea or a further snack, I believe it's only fair to unmute ourselves and give you a final thank you and a round of applause. So if you'd like to do that, people, that'd be much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.